You know, honestly, buying new games feels like walking through a minefield these days because it is getting harder and harder to justify spending $70 when so many big releases launch in a rough state with optimization issues or cut content. It makes you want to just hold on to your wallet and wait for a deep discount a year later. But every now and then you get your hands on a game that restores your faith a little bit. I am talking about those games where the second you start playing you can feel the quality. The movement is responsive and the textures are crisp and the frame rate is actually stable, and you just get this immediate sense that the developers really cared about the product. It is a feeling of relief more than anything else because you know you are in for a good time. So I went through my library and picked out 20 games that give you that exact feeling. These are the games that are so packed with content and polish that you can buy them at full price and feel absolutely great about it because they actually deliver on what they promise. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is honestly the role-playing game I have been waiting for because Warhorse Studios basically took the incredibly ambitious foundation of the first game and polished it into a genuine masterpiece. You are stepping back into the boots of Henry of Skalitz in 1403 Bohemia, and the scale this time around is just massive compared to the first title. We are not just running around small villages and castles anymore because now we are exploring Kuttenberg, which is a legitimate medieval metropolis that feels alive in a way very few games manage to pull off. The CryEngine lighting makes the forests and the city streets look photorealistic, and you can just get lost watching the sunlight filter through the trees or bouncing off the cobblestones. The commitment to realism here is what makes it worth every single penny because there are no dragons or magic spells to save you. You are just a guy with a sword and maybe a primitive firearm. Speaking of firearms, the introduction of early hand cannons and crossbows changes the combat loop entirely. You have these loud, smoky explosions that terrify horses and enemies alike, but the reload times are realistic, so you have to make that one shot count before you draw your steel. The melee combat feels heavier and more refined than the first game, so you are not flailing around as much, but you still have to respect your opponent. If you rush in without watching your stamina or your spacing, you will get surrounded and beaten down immediately. But the real magic is the immersion because the game reacts to you in such a granular way. If you walk into a noble court with mud on your boots and blood on your sword, people will treat you like a barbarian, but if you wash up and wear fancy clothes, they will listen to you. The RPG systems are deep and interconnected, so learning to read or learning to brew potions actually opens up new ways to solve quests. Henry has grown up a bit since the first game, but he is still that lovable, relatable character, and his bromance with Hans Capon is the heart of the story. You are getting dozens and dozens of hours of historical storytelling that respects your intelligence and treats the setting with total seriousness. It is immersive and challenging and incredibly rewarding, which makes it an absolute must-buy for anyone who loves deep RPGs. You have to give incredible credit to Asobo Studio because they somehow managed to create what looks and feels like a massive budget blockbuster while keeping the soul of a focused single-player narrative intact with the A Plague Tale series. If you look at the graphics alone, specifically in the second game Requiem, it is actually mind-blowing because the texture work on the mud and the fabrics and the lighting engine are pushing some serious graphical boundaries. You are playing as Amicia and her little brother Hugo in medieval France, and the atmosphere is just dripping with dread and beauty at the same time. One minute you are walking through a gorgeous sunlit field of flowers that looks like a painting, and the next minute you are wading through a literal sea of rats in a dark crypt. And we need to talk about the rat technology here because it is not just a visual gimmick, it is a technical marvel. The developers built this proprietary engine that can render hundreds of thousands of rats on screen at once, and they move like a fluid, almost like a tidal wave of fur and teeth, and it is genuinely terrifying to watch. The gameplay loop relies so heavily on light and fire to keep them back, and the physics of the fire are super realistic. You are using your sling to light torches or extinguish enemy lanterns to let the rats eat them, and the sound design when the swarm erupts is just visceral. The audio work by Olivier Deriviere is scratching and intense, and uses these deep cello strings that make your skin crawl. But what really makes this worth the money is the character writing. Amicia is not some superhero, she is just a terrified teenager who has to grow up way too fast to protect her brother, and you hear the panic in her breath and you see her hands shaking when she loads her sling. The voice acting is absolutely top tier, especially in the sequel where you can hear the trauma in her voice breaking during the intense moments. It is a linear experience which is honestly refreshing because there is no open world bloat here, just a tight pacing that keeps escalating the stakes until the very end. You are getting a story that hits you right in the gut combined with stealth gameplay that feels tense and rewarding, and it is easily one of the most immersive experiences you can have on modern hardware. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is honestly overwhelming in the best way possible because if you thought Remake was good, this game basically says hold my beer and delivers a 100-hour open-world RPG that makes the first game look like a tech demo. You finally leave the claustrophobic steel sky of Midgar and step out into the grasslands, and the sense of scale is just breathtaking. You are looking at a seamless world map where you can see the Mithril mines in the distance and Junon Cannon looming over the ocean, and you can actually walk there. It is the feeling of a grand adventure that we have been missing in Final Fantasy for a long time. Square Enix somehow perfected the combat system, which was already great, but now it flows like water. The new synergy abilities are the real game changer here because you aren't just switching characters to fill ATB bars anymore, you are actively teaming up. You can have Cloud launch Tifa into the air for an aerial combo or have Barret tank hits while Aerith charges a spell, and it makes the party feel like a real team that actually trusts each other. The stagger mechanics are deeper too, so figuring out the elemental weakness of a boss and then pressuring them until they break feels like solving a puzzle at high speed. And playing as Yuffie or Red 13 feels completely distinct with their own unique mechanics, like Yuffie throwing her shuriken to retrieve items or Red's vengeance gauge, which rewards you for blocking perfectly. But the sheer volume of content is what justifies the price tag because there is just so much to do. You have the Gold Saucer, which is basically a theme park inside the game with motorcycle racing and brawling and a space shooter. And we have to talk about Queen's Blood because it might be the best card minigame since Gwent in The Witcher 3. You will literally stop saving the world for 5 hours just to win a card tournament in a dusty village because the strategy is that addictive. The music is also dynamic and shifts seamlessly from the overworld theme to the battle theme depending on where you are, and the production value is through the roof. It is a massive love letter to the original game, but it feels completely modern and polished, and it is easily one of the best value propositions in gaming right now. Capcom really looked at the original masterpiece and decided they could somehow make it even better, and honestly they absolutely nailed it because Resident Evil 4 Remake is the gold standard for how you modernize a classic. The visual fidelity here is stunning thanks to the RE engine, which makes every texture pop from the mud on Leon's jacket to the grotesque details on the enemies, and the lighting creates this thick atmosphere that is way moodier and scarier than the original. But the real magic is in the gameplay loop because they kept the tension of the original while making the controls feel incredibly modern and responsive. The gunplay has the satisfying punch to it, and the gore system gives you immediate feedback when you land a shot, but the addition of the knife parry mechanic is a total game changer. Being able to deflect a pitchfork or even a chainsaw at the last second with a perfect parry feels so good, and it adds this layer of strategy because your knife has durability, so you are constantly managing your resources while being swarmed. Then you have the Separate Ways DLC, which usually would just be a throwaway mission in other games, but here it feels like a legitimate second campaign. Playing as Ada Wong feels distinct because she is faster and more agile, and she has her grappling hook, which completely opens up the level design. You can zip up to rooftops to get a better sniping angle or use the hook to pull yourself towards stunned enemies for a melee attack, and the flow of combat is just so much quicker than Leon's grounded survival style. It adds about 7 chapters of content, and it weaves into the main story perfectly so you see what was happening behind the scenes, and it answers a lot of questions about the plot. You are getting new environments and unique boss fights and new mechanics, and when you combine the main game with this expansion, you are looking at one of the most polished and complete action horror packages ever made. It is rare to feel like a game respects your time this much, but everything here from the inventory Tetris to the boss encounters is refined to perfection. You know, it is actually crazy how much the narrative around Days Gone has flipped, because when it first launched back in the day it was definitely rough around the edges, but this remastered version is a completely different beast. Ben's studio finally got the hardware they needed to fully realize their vision, and it transforms the experience from a cult classic into a genuine masterpiece of the open-world survival genre. You play as Deacon St. John, who is this rough biker drifter trying to survive in the high desert of Oregon, and the setting is just gorgeous. The dynamic weather system is one of the best I have ever seen, where snow actively accumulates on your jacket and your bike tires, and it actually changes the handling physics in real time, which is super immersive. But the real reason you are here is obviously the hordes, because the technology they built to handle the enemies is still mind-blowing years later. I am not talking about like 20 zombies standing around, I am talking about 300 to 500 freakers pouring out of a train car or a cave like a literal flood of bodies. They climb over each other and flank you and move like water, and on the new hardware it runs at a locked frame rate, which is crucial when you are panic sprinting away from a wall of death. You have to use traps and choke points and explosives, and it feels like a puzzle you have to solve with bullets and strategy instead of just mindless shooting. And we have to talk about the bike because it is not just a vehicle, it is basically a main character that you have to take care of. You have to manage your fuel and scavenge for parts to repair the engine, and the DualSense controller support adds this whole new layer where you can feel the gravel under your tires through the haptics, and the triggers give you resistance when you are revving the throttle. The lighting upgrades make the nights actually pitch black and terrifying, so you are constantly checking your surroundings, and the atmosphere is just thick with tension. It is a massive game, easily 40 to 50 hours if you do everything, and the story really sneaks up on you with how emotional it gets by the end, so if you missed it the first time, this is absolutely the version you need to experience.
Just put the gun to their head.
And then we have to talk about the Silent Hill 2 remake, which, let's be real for a second, everyone was terrified was going to be a disaster. But somehow, Bloober Team didn't just stick the landing. They delivered what I think is one of the best survival horror experiences of the last decade. It honestly belongs on this list because the level of fidelity here is just absurd. They rebuilt the entire thing in Unreal Engine 5, and if you're a graphics nerd like me, you are going to lose your mind at the lighting. The way Lumen handles the global illumination in those dark, rotting hallways is terrifying. It's not just dark, it's that oppressive, thick darkness where your flashlight beam catches dust motes and fog swirling around, and you can practically feel the humidity and the grime on the walls. The atmosphere is just heavy. It's suffocating. And a huge part of that is the sound design. If you play this, please wear headphones because the 3D audio is genuinely distressing. You hear things scuttling behind walls, the radio static swells dynamically as enemies get close, and it creates this constant state of paranoia that the original game had. But now it's dialed up to 11. And gameplay-wise, they made a really smart choice. They switched to that over-the-shoulder camera, right? But unlike Resident Evil, where you feel like a super soldier roundhouse kicking everything, James still feels like just some guy. He's clumsy. He stumbles. When he swings a wooden plank, you feel the weight and the desperation in the animation. The combat is scrappy and uncomfortable, which is exactly how it should be. Plus, they added these seamless transitions. There are no loading screens. You just walk from the foggy streets directly into a building, and the seamlessness keeps you immersed the entire time. They also expanded the map significantly. You're exploring buildings that were just textures in the original game. You're solving new puzzles that actually make sense within the world. And watching James's face, the facial capture is incredible. You can see the exhaustion and the guilt setting in over time. It's a massive, massive game that respects the source material but feels completely modern. You are getting dozens of hours of high-quality psychological horror here, and it is easily worth every single penny. Calling Phantom Liberty just a DLC feels like a massive understatement because CD Projekt Red went absolutely nuclear with this expansion and basically turned Cyberpunk 2077 into the game we were all dreaming of back in the day. You get access to this completely new district called Dogtown, which is this crumbling walled-off combat zone run by a warlord named Kurt Hansen, and the vibe is totally different from the neon gloss of the rest of Night City because it is gritty and desperate and feels like a war zone. The narrative shifts from a mercenary story to a full-on high-stakes spy thriller that feels like something out of a techno-political movie where you are working with sleeper agents and the President of the new United States. The writing is some of the best in the entire RPG genre, especially with Idris Elba playing Solomon Reed because his performance brings so much gravity to the story and you are constantly questioning who you can trust. But the gameplay changes are where your money really goes because the 2.0 update completely rebuilt the perk system from scratch. You aren't just getting percentage stat boosts anymore, you are unlocking game-changing abilities like deflecting bullets with a katana or air dashing while slowing down time to headshot 3 guys in a row. The new Relic skill tree makes your cyberware feel insanely powerful, like upgrading your monowire to upload quick hacks on impact or using the projectile launch system to obliterate armor. Plus, they finally added vehicle combat so you can have these intense Mad Max-style car chases where you are hacking enemy brakes or leaning out the window with an SMG while drifting through traffic. It is violent and stylish, and the production value is through the roof, which makes it essential for anyone who loves immersive sims or action RPGs. Stellar Blade is honestly a breath of fresh air because everyone initially focused on the character design of Eve for obvious reasons, but then the game came out and it turned out to be one of the tightest and most responsive action games on the entire PS5 platform. Shift Up really came out of nowhere and delivered a masterclass in how to make a debut console title because the level of polish here is something you usually only see from studios like Santa Monica or Insomniac. It feels like a throwback to the PlayStation 2 era in spirit where you bought a game and you got the entire experience on day one with unlockable costumes and a full story and zero microtransactions or battle passes cluttering up the menu. The combat is the real star here though because it looks like a hack and slash like Bayonetta, but once you get your hands on the controller you realize it is actually much closer to Sekiro. You cannot just button mash your way to victory or you will get punished immediately. You have to stand your ground and study the enemy attack patterns and time your blocks perfectly. When you land that perfect parry you get this incredibly satisfying metallic clang sound and a shower of yellow sparks, and it fills up your beta energy gauge which lets you unleash these massive anime-style special moves. The feedback loop of parrying and dodging and then countering with a high damage breaker skill is addictive, and the animations are so fluid that you never feel like the game cheated you. Plus, the soundtrack is absolutely phenomenal with these sweeping vocal tracks that swell during boss fights, and it gives the whole game this melancholic yet high-octane atmosphere that keeps you glued to the screen. It runs at a rock-solid 60 frames per second in performance mode, which is crucial for a game that demands this level of precision, and it is easily one of the most satisfying combat systems I have played in years. If you thought Doom Eternal was the peak of the series, you need to look at what they are doing with Doom: The Dark Ages, because ID Software basically reinvented their own combat loop again. In Eternal, you were flying around the arena like an acrobat, but here you are a literal tank. You feel the weight of the Slayer in every single step because he is wearing this heavy medieval power armor with a fur cloak, and the movement is grounded and impactful. The biggest game changer is absolutely the shield saw, which is this insane mix of defense and offense. You are not just dodging anymore, you are standing your ground and parrying projectiles and then throwing the shield to decapitate demons, and it just feels incredibly violent and satisfying. The weapon design is also leaning super hard into this dark fantasy aesthetic that mixes magic with technology. You have weapons like the Skull Crusher, which literally grinds up skulls to shoot bone shards at enemies, and the sound design for it is crunchy and disgusting. And speaking of scale, we finally get to actually pilot the Atlan mech, which we only saw as background props in the last game. You are stomping through massive battlefields, punching demons the size of skyscrapers in the face, and then you are riding a cybernetic dragon and breathing fire on hordes of enemies. It is pure heavy metal fantasy brought to life on the latest ID tech engine, so you know the performance is going to be buttery smooth even with thousands of particles on screen. This is a completely new flavor of Doom that focuses on sheer power, and it is exactly what the franchise needed to stay fresh. Remedy Entertainment made us wait 13 long years for this sequel, but Alan Wake 2 is honestly a masterpiece that redefines what a video game narrative can actually be. You are getting two completely different experiences here because you play as Saga Anderson, who is this brilliant FBI profiler investigating ritualistic murders in the Pacific Northwest, and then you switch to Alan, who is trapped in a nightmare dimension called the Dark Place. The way they blend live-action footage with the in-game graphics is seamless, and sometimes you cannot even tell the difference because the Northlight engine is pushing facial animation and lighting to a level that looks photorealistic. They finally pivoted fully into the survival horror genre, so the combat is way heavier and more desperate than the first game. You are not running and gunning anymore because ammo is scarce, and the enemies are these terrifying shadow monsters that absorb bullets unless you burn the darkness away with your flashlight first. The sound design is incredibly oppressive and makes you feel like you are going crazy, especially when you are playing as Alan and the environment keeps shifting around you in real time. But the coolest mechanic has to be the mind place, where you can instantly transport into Saga's head to pin clues on a caseboard and deduce where to go next without any loading screens. It makes you feel like an actual detective solving a mystery instead of just following a waypoint. And I have to mention the musical number because yes, there is a literal rock opera sequence in the middle of this horror game, and it is one of the most creative things I have ever seen. You are paying for a pure artistic vision here without any compromise, and it is terrifying and weird and absolutely unforgettable. If you want to talk about a game that is just pure unadulterated video game bliss, then you have to talk about Devil May Cry 5 because Capcom absolutely lost their minds in the best way possible with this one. It is the king of the character action genre, and it proves that nobody does stylish combat better than the team at Capcom. The first thing that hits you is the RE Engine visuals because they scanned actual models for the characters, and the clothing, so Nero's coat looks like real leather and the facial animations are almost disturbingly realistic, which makes the over-the-top anime action feel even more insane. But the gameplay is where every single penny of your money goes because the depth here is bottomless. You start with Nero, who is aggressive and loud, and he has these disposable mechanical arms called Devil Breakers. You can use one to shoot shockwaves, or another one called Punchline that is literally a rocket fist you can ride like a skateboard while doing flips. Then you have V, who plays like a Pokemon trainer where you stand in the back reading poetry from a book, while your Shadow Panther and Lightning Griffin do all the fighting for you, which is such a weird risk for an action game, but it totally works. And then you get Dante, and oh man, Dante is just on another level. He has so many weapons and styles that it can be overwhelming at first, but once it clicks you feel like a god. He literally takes a motorcycle, splits it in half, and uses it as 2 giant chainsaws to grind demons into paste. Who comes up with that? The best part is the dynamic soundtrack that changes based on how well you are playing, so if you are just stumbling around the music is quiet, but if you are hitting that triple S rank the vocals kick in and the beat drops and it pumps you up so much. It is the definition of a video game that knows exactly what it is, and it is gloriously fun from start to finish. Sifu is honestly a masterpiece of design because it understands exactly what makes martial arts movies so cool and then gamifies it perfectly. You are playing as this kung fu student out for revenge, and the hook is that every time you die you resurrect a little bit older. It is such a brilliant risk versus reward system because as you age your strikes deal more damage because you are a master now, but your health bar gets tiny because you are literally an old man or woman. It forces you to actually learn the game instead of just grinding for stats because you cannot outlevel the aging process, so you just have to get better at the actual mechanics. The combat system is developed by Slocklap, who made Absolver, and they really refined their engine here to focus on structure and avoidance. You cannot just button mash your way through this or you will get surrounded and destroyed in seconds because the AI is aggressive and they will flank you. You have to use the environment like kicking footstools at enemies or throwing bottles to create space, and the parry timing is super tight. But the best feeling in the world is the avoid mechanic where you hold the block button and flick the stick to weave under a high hook or hop over a leg sweep. When you dodge a 3-hit combo perfectly and then punish the enemy with a rapid-fire flurry of punches, it makes you feel like you are starring in The Raid or a classic Bruce Lee film. The art style is also stunning with this painterly aesthetic that makes the blood and the motion blur look incredible, especially in levels like the museum where you are fighting in these abstract, colorful void rooms. It is definitely hard and it will test your patience, but the feeling of mastery you get when you finally clear a level at age 20 is worth every single cent because you earned it. You simply cannot talk about games that justify their price tag without bringing up Astro Bot, because honestly this might be the most joyous video game I have played in 5 years. Team Asobi took what was originally just a tech demo and turned it into a full-blown 3-dimensional platforming masterpiece that stands toe-to-toe with the best Mario games. You are looking at over 50 planets spread across multiple galaxies, and the sheer variety in the level design is staggering because 1 minute you are in a neon synthwave casino and the next you are shrinking down to the size of a mouse to explore a bedroom. The real magic here though is obviously the DualSense integration, because nobody uses the controller like the studio does. You can literally feel the difference between walking on metal and sand and glass through the haptic feedback in your palms. When it rains in the game, you feel the individual raindrops tapping the controller, and the adaptive triggers fight back when you use the monkey climbing arms or the frog gloves. It creates this tactile connection to the world that no other game on the market has really figured out yet. And then you have the PlayStation nostalgia, which is just injected into every single corner of this universe. You are rescuing hundreds of little VIP bots dressed up as characters from Bloodborne and God of War and Uncharted and Metal Gear Solid. It is a massive love letter to 30 years of gaming history, and spotting the obscure references becomes addictive. The physics are also incredible, with thousands of little apples or ball pit balls reacting realistically when you run through them, and it all runs at a flawless 60 frames per second. It is pure, unfiltered happiness in video game form, and it reminds you why you started playing games in the first place, which makes it worth every single penny. If you want to see what the PlayStation 5 is actually capable of, then you have to play Returnal, because Housemarque somehow took their arcade twin-stick shooter DNA and converted it into a triple-A third-person roguelike that looks and feels absolutely incredible. You play as Celine, who crash lands on this hostile alien planet called Atropos, and right away the atmosphere is just dripping with this cosmic horror vibe that feels like Prometheus met Edge of Tomorrow. The particle effects are the first thing you notice because there are thousands of neon bullets filling the screen, and the volumetric fog and the lighting make the world feel wet and slimy and alive. But the gameplay is where the addiction really sets in, because the movement is so responsive. You have this dash that gives you invincibility frames, which lets you dodge through literal walls of energy projectiles, and it makes you feel like a superhero once you master the timing. The DualSense controller features are arguably the best on the entire system because you can feel the individual raindrops falling on your suit through the haptics, and the adaptive triggers are used for the alternate fire modes. You pull the trigger halfway to aim down sights and then snap it all the way down to fire a grenade or a laser beam, and it becomes pure muscle memory after like 10 minutes. The rogue-like elements are brutal but fair because even though you lose your items when you die, you are constantly leveling up weapon traits. So a pistol that was useless in the beginning might unlock a homing missile trait that makes it a god-tier weapon later on. And I have to mention the sound design, specifically the boss fight with Hyperion, where the boss is literally playing a massive alien organ that gets louder as you climb the tower. It creates this trance state where you are dodging and shooting to the rhythm of the music, and it is one of the most intense flow states you can experience in gaming. It is expensive and it is hard, but the feeling of conquering a biome after dying 10 times is a rush that very few other games can give you. Santa Monica Studio somehow managed to take the foundation of the 2018 reboot and build a skyscraper on top of it because God of War Ragnarok is practically overflowing with content and polish. We are picking up 3 years later during Fimbulwinter, so everything is frozen over and the stakes are immediately higher because Kratos is trying to prevent the literal end of the world while dealing with a teenage Atreus who is desperate for answers. The writing is incredibly sharp because you see this shift in their dynamic where Atreus is more capable and independent but also more reckless, and Kratos is struggling to let go, which adds so much emotional weight to every conversation. The combat system is where the game truly justifies the price tag though, because they fixed the biggest complaint from the first game, which was the lack of enemy variety. Now you are fighting everything from massive crocodiles called Dreki to Einherjar warriors that teleport around the arena, and the verticality they added changes everything. You can use the Blades of Chaos to grapple up to ledges and slam down on enemies, which keeps the flow moving constantly. The Leviathan axe still feels amazing to throw and recall with that heavy thud, but now you have weapon signature moves like charging up frost or fire for massive elemental damage. Plus, the shield system is fully fleshed out, so you can choose between a heavy shield for blocking big hits or a smaller buckler for high-risk, high-reward parries that leave enemies wide open. And we have to talk about the side content, specifically the crater area in Vanaheim, because it is basically an entire open-world game hidden inside the main story. You could easily spend 10 hours just exploring that one region, hunting dragons and solving lore puzzles, and it feels essential rather than optional. The level of detail in the realms is staggering, with Svartalfheim being this intricate dwarven city full of machinery and puzzles, while Asgard looks completely different from what you expect. It is a massive 40 to 50 hour experience if you want to see everything, and the fact that they maintained the single continuous camera shot for the entire runtime without a single loading screen is a technical miracle. You are getting a complete story without any cliffhangers and a combat system that is deep and rewarding, and it is easily one of the best action-adventure games ever made. If you want to talk about developers who understand the assignment, you have to look at Insomniac Games, because they single-handedly saved the superhero genre with the Spider-Man series. I am grouping Miles Morales and Spider-Man 2 together here because they represent the absolute peak of traversal mechanics. In Miles Morales, you get this tighter, more focused story set during winter, and the atmosphere is just cozy and beautiful with the snow on the rooftops. But the real detail is in the animations, because Miles swings differently than Peter does. He is clumsy and he flails his arms and legs, and he has this exaggerated swagger that fits his character perfectly. The Venom powers add this layer of bioelectric chaos where you are stunning enemies and chaining lightning attacks, and it feels snappy and energetic. Then you jump into Spider-Man 2 and the scale just explodes. They added the web wings, which completely changes how you move through the city. You are catching wind tunnels and gliding at like 100 miles an hour, and because of the PS5 SSD, you can fast travel from one end of the map to the other instantly without a single loading screen. It is a technical marvel. The combat gets way more brutal, especially when Peter gets the black suit, because you feel the aggression in the controller haptics, and the animations shift from heroic to downright violent. The new parry mechanic means you aren't just dodging anymore, you are standing your ground and fighting back against Kraven's hunters and the symbiote hordes. The story balances two main characters seamlessly, and by the time the credits roll, you realize you just played through a summer blockbuster that is better than most of the actual movies coming out these days. So honestly, the price of admission is a steal for this level of quality. From Software usually trains us to roll around on the floor in Dark Souls, but Sekiro Shadows Die Twice grabs you by the collar and forces you to stand your ground and fight. This is not an RPG where you can grind levels to overpower a boss, because there is practically no leveling up here. You just have to actually get better at the game. You are playing as the wolf in this beautiful twisted version of Sengoku-era Japan, and the combat is honestly the best sword fighting system ever programmed. It is all about the rhythm of the deflection, because you are not just chipping away at a health bar, you are trying to break their posture. You hear that loud metallic clang when swords clash and you see the sparks fly, and it puts you in this zen state where you are reacting purely on instinct. The Makiri counter is easily one of the most satisfying mechanics in gaming history, where an enemy tries to thrust a spear at you, and you just stomp on the blade and stab them, which makes you feel like an absolute master swordsman. And because there is no stamina bar, you can run and attack endlessly, which changes the pace completely compared to Bloodborne or Elden Ring. You have the shinobi prosthetic on your left arm, which adds so much versatility, like grappling up to rooftops to get a stealth kill, or using firecrackers to stun a charging bull, or pulling out a magnetic iron umbrella to block bullets. The boss fights are basically skill checks where Genichiro Ashina forces you to learn the mechanics or quit, and the final boss is the ultimate test of everything you have learned. It is brutal and it will punish you for hesitating, but when you finally see that red execution dot appear after hours of trying, the dopamine hit is unlike anything else in the medium, because you know you earned it with pure skill. Honestly, it feels illegal that Team Cherry is only charging $20 for Hollow Knight Silksong, because when you look at the sheer amount of content packed into this game, it puts most $70 AAA releases to shame. We waited literal years for this, and the hype was uncontrollable, but playing it now you completely understand why it took so much time to bake. You are playing as Hornet, and right away the game feels faster and more lethal than the original, because she is not a silent vessel, she is a predator. The movement is so much more acrobatic because you can mantle up ledges and sprint instantly, and the combat has this beautiful dance-like quality to it where you are weaving in and out of attacks using your needle and silk tools. The setting of Farloom is just gorgeous, and instead of descending into the dark like in the first game, you are constantly ascending towards the peak of the shining citadel. The color palette is vibrant with these mossy greens and gilded golds, and the enemy variety is staggering with over 150 new bugs that all have unique attack patterns. And the mechanics have been deepened with the new crafting system where you can forge tools on the fly using shards you collect from enemies, which adds a layer of strategy to every encounter. Plus, you have the new quest system called Wishes, which actually gives you a reason to interact with the NPCs and learn about the lore without it ever feeling like a generic checklist. The healing is also totally different because, unlike the knight who had to stand still to focus, Hornet binds her wounds instantly in the heat of battle, which keeps the pace incredibly high. Christopher Larkin returned for the soundtrack, and the orchestral score is just sweeping and majestic, and it elevates every single boss fight into an emotional event. It is stylish and difficult, and the map is absolutely massive, so you are easily getting 50 to 60 hours of gameplay here. It is a masterpiece of design and atmosphere, and getting it for such a low price feels like highway robbery in the best way possible. You cannot have a conversation about value in video games without immediately bringing up Elden Ring, because this game fundamentally changed how we look at open worlds forever. From Software and Hidetaka Miyazaki somehow took the claustrophobic tension of Dark Souls and stretched it across this massive painting of a world called The Lands Between, and it works perfectly. You step out of that starting tomb into Limgrave, and you see the Erd Tree glowing in the sky, and there are no quest markers and no mini-map cluttering up your screen, and you just pick a direction and go. It is that sense of pure, unguided discovery that makes it so special, because if you see a castle in the distance, you can actually go there, and it will probably have a unique boss and a legendary weapon inside. The build variety is where you lose hundreds of hours of your life. You can be a heavy armor knight swinging a slab of iron that weighs more than you do, or a spellblade using gravity magic, or a faith build throwing lightning bolts like Zeus. The Ash of War system lets you customize your weapons so deeply that two people playing the same class will have completely different experiences. And if you get stuck on a boss like Margit the Fell Omen, you do not have to bang your head against a wall for hours. You can just hop on your spectral steed torrent and ride away to explore a completely different region until you are strong enough to come back and crush him. Then you add the Shadow of the Erdtree expansion, which is basically Elden Ring 2 disguised as DLC. The scale of the Realm of Shadow is absurd, with verticality that makes your head spin and bosses like Mesmer the Impaler that will absolutely humble you all over again. The lore written with George R.R. Martin is deep and tragic, and you will spend hours reading item descriptions just to understand why the world is so messed up. It is a game that respects your intelligence and rewards your curiosity with actual meaningful content instead of filler, and that is why it is worth every single penny of that $60 or $70 price tag. We have to talk about Clair Obscur Expedition 33, because honestly this game came out of nowhere and completely embarrassed the rest of the RPG genre by showing everyone how it is done. Sandfall Interactive built this thing in Unreal Engine 5, and the visual fidelity is just absurd because they went with this surrealist Belle Epoque aesthetic that makes every single frame look like a moving oil painting. You are exploring this world called Lumiere, which is inspired by late 19th century France, but twisted into this nightmare fantasy, where a goddess called the Paintress wakes up once a year to paint a number on a monolith. And whoever is that age just turns to smoke and dies instantly. It is such a dark and unique hook for a story because the number is ticking down and now it is at 33, so you are playing as the expedition team trying to kill her before she wipes out an entire generation. But the reason this is on the list of games worth your money is the combat system, because they call it reactive turn-based, and it fixes the one problem people usually have with JRPGs, which is getting bored during the enemy turn. You literally cannot put the controller down here. When an enemy attacks, you have to parry or dodge or jump over shockwaves in real time like you are playing Sekiro or Devil May Cry. If you time the parry perfectly, you can trigger a massive counter-attack, and it feels so crunchy and satisfying. Then, on your turn, you have these rhythm mechanics for your skills and a free aim system for your guns, so you are constantly engaged with the mechanics. It demands your attention and it respects your skill level. And we have to mention the production value because the voice cast is actually insane for a debut title. You have Charlie Cox playing Gustav and Ben Starr, who we all loved as Clive Rosefield in Final Fantasy XVI playing Verso, and even Andy Serkis is in there. Hearing these top-tier actors deliver this emotional story about mortality and grief adds so much weight to the experience. It is a focused 30 to 40-hour journey with zero filler, and every single dungeon and boss fight feels handcrafted and unique. You aren't grinding meaningless fetch quests, you are pushing forward through this beautiful tragic world, and it is easily one of the most memorable RPG experiences of the last few years.